This is the format meeting. It looks like Pen 2 does not yet have quorum. Pen 1, do you have quorum?
I think we do. Let's do a roll call vote. Claudio Campuzano will join us in a few minutes. He's on another call. Annalisa Kohler.
Present.
PJ Christopher.
Present, if you can hear me.
Great, thank you, PJ. Jeff Noodleman.
Present.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And James Allison is present. Pen 1 has quorum.
Thank you. MCDD, do you have quorum?
We do. We'll do a roll call. Corky Collier
Corky's here.
and Kenzie Berry.
Present.
And I think, and Nancy Hendrickson is present. We have 3 people here. And so we have quorum.
I see Pen 2, Val Humble is present, and Leslie Sawyer's here. Is there anyone else from Pen 2 that I'm not seeing on the screen? Okay, we do not have quorum. And SDIC, I believe, is not expected to have quorum. Is that correct?
We will not have quorum today.
Okay. Well, is there any public testimony?
No public testimony expected today.
And no one speaking up. Okay. Is Nick available to discuss contracts?
Yes, sir, but we have no contracts for approval today.
But you have some report.
Yes, sir. The next up is my contracts issued report. If Kirsten's going to try to throw it on the screen, I think. There we go. It's coming. Okay, so some of you have had a chance to see this during the urban board meeting, but I was requested a couple months ago to make a contracts issued report. In brief, our contract signing authorities says that many contracts come to the different boards. Contracts that are less than $100,000 or meet many other conditions can be signed by Executive Director Jim Adaw or his designees. One of the requirements is any contracts that we sign without coming through the board, we report to the board at least annually. In the meantime, we decided to do way more than that. We're going to shoot for at least quarterly or monthly at first till you tell us otherwise. So this is my first draft of a contract issued report, and I can always tweak it. I got a couple of suggestions last week when I showed it to the urban board, but I tried to create a simple high-level report that shows all the contracts we issued. A couple of choices I made when I was making this report. I decided not to include just the contracts that you haven't seen, but all the contracts we've issued. Did that on purpose because it seemed easier. So some of the contracts, such as the contract we issued recently to Echo Northwest for $249,000, the boards are well aware of. So that's one choice I made. I also decided to show all the 5 different boards contracts on the one page. So that's why I handed out to you, because many times a board cares about the other board's contracts. Like in this case, the JCA actually issued the contract to Echo Northwest on behalf of the urban district because they're the ones that had the funding. So a couple of choices I made there on this contract should be fairly self-explanatory. It's just a manual list I made of all the contracts that we have issued so far this year. I mentioned on page 2 that I decided not to include IGAs on this report. They're more technical in nature and they go through a separate legal review. And I decided not to include task orders. In general, we issue a contract to some company and say we issue it to an engineering company. And then over the course of that contract, we might issue 5 task orders to have them do specific tasks under that contract. In this case, I figured what was useful for the board is knowing which contracts we've issued in general. So take a look at that. Give me a call or email with any questions, or I can take any feedback now if you have any suggestions as to how I might improve this report.
And if I may, this was in response to some of the discussion that you all had with us as we were changing some of the delegation authorities. And we're also going to be bringing you a financial report starting your next group of meetings. So I want to thank you for your direction and also just make clear to you if there's different information or additional information that you all would like to have, we are very interested in providing it to you.
Yes, this is purely an informational thing for the board. And I meant to start off with, if I could back up, I am pleased, Mr. Ben Rowe, if you'd show yourself. we were lucky enough to hire a new budget manager to replace Casey, who's Casey Short, who has worked with you all for 10 years. Ben joins us with 14 years of experience leading cross-functional teams in finance and budget development. Ben has worked for the City of Hillsborough, Mount Hood Community College, and Metro, and several others. Ben brings a wealth of experience, and I welcome him to our team.
Thanks, Nick. Glad to be here.
Okay, that concludes my report, sir.
Thank you.
Looks like we have some questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Questions, please.
So Corky,
Sure. First of all, I think this is great. It's simple, it's clear, it's informative. Hopefully it doesn't give you too much consternation to come up with.
No, sir.
Okay, great. One thing, and I don't know if we want to get into the contents of this right now, so I'll defer to for you guys to tell me, but it does highlight the amount that we're spending and the increases that we're spending on homeless camping issues. That's disturbing, and I'm wondering if at some point we want to start looking at how much of that is what we really expect to and should be spending, and how much is due to non-response from other government agencies. So if we're asking other government agencies to fulfill their role to do things, they're not fulfilling that. That causes us to increase our expenses. That might be nice to know. I know that's a topic for another conversation, but I want to kind of tee that up perhaps.
Okay.
Thank you. We do have some resolutions before you later about the homeless topic, and I think it's my intention during that time to maybe delve into a little bit more of those issues, if that's acceptable to the board.
Works for
James,
me.
do you have
Thank you.
something?
Great. Thank you. Just a couple things. First of all, Nick, I think it's great to have this standing agenda item, whether we use it or not. I definitely appreciate this report, so thank you. Quick question. I feel a little ignorant here, but I notice that this contract is spread amongst the boards. What is S&F Land Services? What service do they provide for us?
You know, that was asked in the last board meeting, and I didn't look that up yet. I'm looking at the attendance. Kelly, you know the answer to that? I do not know, sir.
Oh, maybe.
Ahong.
You know, I'm gonna let Mark, the expert, tell you.
Hi, S&F Land Services is a surveying company, and so they would be used for that. We also are using them to get to access title search services for the real estate project.
So just to add on to that, they're one of the two land surveying companies we have on call for that service. So you'll see their name in future documents as well.
I love this feature. When I don't know the answer to your question, I can simply call a friend, literally. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I guess that puts Mark on deck for the Portland Metropolitan Levy System report.
Thank you. I'll defer. Jamie's going to introduce us, so I'm just going to get our presentation up online here.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all again. I'm Jamie Damon with Kearns and West. I've been supporting staff and all of you in these conversations around the PMLS project as well as other projects. So we've got about 25 minutes with you today, and we're following up on a number of items that you've asked us to follow up with you about. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, Mark. We've got a little mini agenda for what we're going to talk with you about. So Mark's going to give you just a general project update about the PMLS project, where we are right now. We've got some information to share with you about the modeling. You asked us about the different modeling, specifically the economic and life loss, but Mark's going to give you an overview of the different models, and so we'll have a little bit of a conversation about that. As we have been talking over the last few months about the funding and allocation, we have a revenue update to share with you, and a little bit of information there. We're going to put the project timeline in front of you again, because we just put that out at every meeting so you can see where we are and what's upcoming. And then we have just a little bit to share with you about partner collaboration. So those are the items we've got to talk with you about today. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mark to jump in on the modeling.
Great. I'll cover a quick project update, just where we're at with the PMLS. As everyone knows, the final report was signed by the chief engineer last month, and it's making its way up the core chain of command through the Assistant Secretary of the Army, and then it will be going up to the Office of Management and Budget, at which point then they'll finally be able to sign the finding of no significant impact. And at that point, it will be publicly releasable. So I just want to stress, if anyone wants to see the final report, we previously provided board members with individual links so that they could access the report, but not, again, it's not available to share to the greater public. So we can provide fresh links for anyone that is interested, that hasn't seen report contents. And in the meantime, staff is continuing to work on their pre-ped work plan, real estate issues, pre-ped planning, and all those sorts of things, funding and allocations activities. So now move forward for the exciting stuff. This is kind of a teaser. We are going to provide we have a memo that we're providing. It's just so much good stuff. We're tightening up the last little bits of how much is too much, and so we will be publishing the memo requested very shortly. But there was questions principally about the last two models in this list. I think everyone knows that there was geotechnical modeling work that followed on LRC's work. There was hydraulics and hydrology modeling. That goes without saying for a flood model. But of course, the output models, the ones that give us the results that tell us why we should choose one plan over another, or why the Corps chose one plan over another. It comes down to the economic damages as well as the life loss, life safety issues. So I'm going to talk briefly about these models in general, and then I'm going to talk specifically to the two that the boards had questions on. And there'll be more a little bit more meat in the memo. And then of course, if you really are left wanting, you can dive deep into the 60 and 80 pages of the two appendices respectively, which I think everyone as a board member should do to better understand these topics. But it can be overwhelming without a little bit of a primer first to get you warmed up. So
and Mark, I'm just going to interrupt and say, if any of you would like to have a session with staff to go through that work, let me know and we'll see if we can't make that happen.
And we promise we won't require a lot of coffee, maybe a little bit of coffee, but not a tremendous amount of coffee. So
there may be other beverages that would work better, Mark. I'm just saying.
That's right. Equal opportunity. So again, the geotechnical data, that was basically, those geotechnical models were used to figure out where the levee is fragile and where it might rupture. Then those failure points were injected into the hydraulics and hydrology model. And there was what we call Monte Carlo simulation, probabilistic simulation, basically statistically based simulation of like multiple scenarios to figure out, to balance probability versus consequence, and what are the output water surface elevations that impact the districts, what the timing is, what the depth is for various storm events, and what the most probable are. That produces a bunch of water surface elevations that then goes into the two ladder models. The ladder models, economic benefits, was modeled using something called HEC-FDA, Hydrologic Engineering Center Flood Damage Analysis. That is an economic benefits model that is standard, so that all core projects are looked at through the same lens. Like there's no difference in methodology when it gets to senior core management and to Congress. It is done using a standard rationale, so nobody has is on uneven ground because they were able to pay a consultant to do a different, use a different, more advanced model. And this model is fairly advanced compared with HAZUS modeling that we've talked about in the past that FEMA offers. HAZUS is relatively simple. It's simpler, it's easier to implement, so it's more accessible to some people. Luckily, we had a $3 million study that allowed the Corps to have the resources to actually run the economic benefits model, HEC FDA. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about it, but in general, again, we've talked about building contents, building damage, just like vehicles throughout the floodplain that are open, debris removal, economic disruptions. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But in the end, we were able to come up with economic damages, and that contributed to the net benefits and the cost benefit ratio of these projects. Now, in the past, the Corps only cared about economic benefits in some way because in the past, we didn't have the tools to model life loss. Nowadays, we have tools like HEC Life Sim, which are used to literally model, we call it agent modeling. I'll show you another slide, that literally models little dots for people as they travel through the floodplain, down the streets that they have put into the model, and tracks warning and notification times and moves the little dots through the model. And unfortunately, at some point, some of the dots intersect with the water surface elevations, and they're injured or they unfortunately perish. So very dark, but it's an important topic. And so now we have tools like this that the Corps can use to arrive at some of these metrics. And unlike in other venues, sometimes people try to put, I think agencies have to their detriment tried to put a dollar value on lives. We don't, that's not what Life Sim is all about. Life Sim just comes up with statistical probabilities and average numbers for day and night scenarios in the floodplain to inform how well the proposed project improves the evacuation from the floodplain over the current or baseline conditions. Okay, I'm going to jump back. That was kind of a very quick overview, and don't worry, I'm not going to go into painful detail on these right now, but I want to give you just enough so that you get a better sense of it based on your questions last time. So we'll go back to economic benefits modeling and HEC FDA. Last time we talked about, every single structure in the floodplain. You'll see a graph. Next slide will show you an example. All the structures were pulled from previous work by Dogami. They had already done all this work inventorying structures. So the good thing is the Corps was able to come along and not spend all their budget entering structures. They were actually able to spend their time verifying the inventory that was in there, verifying it for structure type. Like are all the buildings that are concrete construction truly concrete construction? Are the manufactured homes manufactured homes? Did was the data entry correct? So then the hydrologic model informs the timing and the depth and the duration of flooding. And there are these things here very simply represented by this curve to the left of the house in the picture. It's a depth damage curve. And that just basically graphs the depth of water against the percentage of replacement cost of the building. So if a building is, you can see here is up to the second floor or the first floor, there's a basement on it. It's halfway through the first floor. What percentage of replacement value is calculated is a damage to that building? And that's done throughout the entire floodplain. And that factors in the finished floor elevation. So for instance, like large warehouses, their damages may not start until the first floor or a couple of feet above the first floor. In less durable structures, like a manufactured home, the damage begins actually a couple feet below the finished floor elevation. So the foundation is not as robust, and it's not like a concrete slab. And so you actually start getting damage to that structure ahead of reaching the first floor elevation. So all that sort of stuff, there's a lot of data from National Flood Insurance Program, from claims information, from damage assessments post incidents. And so that is empirical data that feeds these depth damage curves. Moving on from buildings, we have commercial activity. So we have, and also personal activity. So when Portland International Airport is shut down due to water on the runways, debris on the runways, silt on the runways from following a flood, how many weeks is it down, and what's the cost per day to the airport? On a personal level, they sort of monetize people's time and how much time they have to take to go to a different airport to travel. So all these sorts of things are factored in using standard economic methods. Transportation and railroad, we both identify the damage to the rail infrastructure, the tracks and other infrastructure, but also the detours and the reroutes that are required for both personal and for commercial, like cargo and freight trains. And so all that stuff is available. It's those sections are actually pretty straightforward and easy to read in the economic section. Then there's cleanup and debris removal, and that was taken from other disasters where they took up, there was flooding from, say, Katrina and other instances. They have empirical information on roughly by acreage what it takes to clean up open spaces. And when I say clean up, debris removal, restoration, we're not talking about aspirational habitat projects. We're talking about just getting woody debris and building structures and things off of streets, out of green spaces, clean up the area. What does that cost? And so Dennis, the economist, found some empirical information on that, and that informed this project. So for places like Penn 1, the golf course, the raceway, where you need to clean up some of those open spaces, or parks and recreation, where we need to get those places operational, that stuff was factored into. So it wasn't just about commercials and residential buildings. I'm going to pause for a second on this graph, and while you guys think about any questions, and again, we have plenty of other opportunities, but I want to show you this while you think about any questions you might have. This graph shows you, this is a 1,000-year storm event. So we don't normally model 1,000-year storm events, but obviously the Corps is looking at a range of scenarios up to the 1,000-year storm event, or the 0.1% AEP, which I don't think I have to remind everyone. 1,000-year doesn't mean, it means that statistically it's likely to only happen once in 1,000 years. You could have 2 or 3 1,000-year events in 1,000 years. You could have 0. But statistically speaking, that's sort of the probability, just as a 100-year storm event is, you could have several 100-year storm events within 100 years. And most often we've seen that happen, especially as our weather changes. This graph shows you all the structures that were inventoried. In some cases, it shows you the depth of inundation. They kind of picked out some, I wouldn't say popular, but some well-known buildings to share those depths. And you can see areas on higher ground have less flooding, or green. Areas that are more fully inundated, greater than 10 feet, are shown or depicted in red. And then that blue kind of gradient in the background, those are depths of inundation. So the darker the blue, the more flooding we have. So you can see like Portland Airport is kind of in the middle ground as far as how much flooding. That's all based on how much water comes in relative to the actual base elevation within the floodplain. We have deeper areas within our districts. Okay.
So just a really quick question, Mark, is this from levees overtopping, or is this from rain collected internally?
The modeling includes everything. So when they model this, they have, well, it's a range of storms. Like I said, Monte Carlo's probabilistic simulation, that all means like they take a range of storms, and the probability of the higher ones is factored in. So the lower probability of a more catastrophic storm, and then the more frequent low impact storms are all factored in, and then there's sort of an average. But this is an average of 1,000-year storm events, and that factors into probable breach failures as well as internal precipitation.
Oh, okay, thanks.
And so there are 1,000-year storm events where we have a 1,000-year storm event for the Columbia, and we have 1,000-year rain events that happen within the districts. And so that kind of, the best thing I can say is it kind of comes out in the wash. It's averaged out for likely recurring recurrences.
I note that the graphic shows that the water level at 35.5 foot. Is that what that's based on? Water reaching that gauge level inside the dikes?
Yes. I see that on the scale here, the on the gradient legend. Yeah, that's what I'm taking it to mean. Yeah.
Thank you.
For your take.
Okay, so we'll have more time to talk about these. I want to finish running through these. Certainly, if you have any more immediate questions, let me know, but I'm going to continue through the material. So this is one of, we tried to pull out some relevant factoids just to wet your whistle, tease you, get you into the memo when it arrives. This is one factoid. So there was 1,000-year, there was 100-year, there was 500-year flood scenarios. These are some facts that came out from the 500-year scenario. And I'll back up for a second. Say, so the baseline conditions are always modeled, and then the alternatives were modeled, and then the damages are compared. So the difference between the, so it's not to say that there's no damages with alternative 3, 4, 5. The recommended plan was alternative 5. There's still damages. We can never truly eliminate risk or impacts. However, this modeling helps us see just how much we have avoided, how much damage we avoided, how much economic consequences. So in this case, for the 500-year modeling, you can see a reduction, 100% reduction in structures that were inundated more than 10 feet. That's fantastic, right? 92% of reduction in structures inundated between 5 and 10 feet. So these are some great numbers. So it shows, partially when they were doing all the optimization of, trying to figure out how high can we raise Pen 1 and Pen 2 to get them equal to MCDD and SDIC. Some of these thresholds, they could see the actual impacts. So it's not just monetary, it's also looking at individual structures, just pure depth of flow. The numbers on the left represent the baseline versus the recommended plan damages, and I'll just say those are annualized over 50 years. So very roughly speaking, you can multiply that by 50. That's not mathematically totally correct, but like an insurance analyst would basically annualize it over 50 years. So these numbers don't look very high, 31 million, but when you think about over 50 years, it's a much bigger number. And so we have about $15 million of benefits, which multiplied by 50 is almost $1 billion. If you look at the Vanport flooding, they calculated $21.5 million in damages, and I brought that up to today's dollars, which was $250 million roughly. So we've seen there's a lot of wealth that has accumulated behind the levees over those years. So a lot of information. There's a lot more in the appendix. I'm going to keep moving and talk about life loss briefly. So what I want to stress about life loss is, like I said before, they literally they had structures in, and then they associated certain numbers of people to each structure, obviously depending on whether they're residential, commercial. They had 2 time frames, night and day. There was recognition that there's 24-hour operations at some of the commercial facilities within the floodplain, or say at the airport or other facilities. So there was more residential populations at night than usual, and they gathered data on how to populate the commercial structures to the best of their ability. And so that influenced how many people or what population was at risk in the floodplain. And then they entered the arteries, the streets, and all the elevations, and LifeSim literally puts little dots for all the people, and then starts to move them. And they move them based on emergency notification scenarios and our interviews with our emergency managers on how long it takes for them to get notifications out, how long it takes for them to notify people about evacuations, how effective those evacuations are typically based on empirical data from past events. And all that basically then, they push go, and all these little people, it's called agent-based modeling. All these little people get moved through the floodplain and to these, it's very small, but you can see these like stars. So they basically move them to points outside the floodplain, points in which they would be safe. And there's actually traffic congestion modeling that's built into the model as well. So, if you have 3,000 people trying to leave the airport at once, they're slowed down. They can't all get out quickly because the roads, are either slower than normal because of congestion, or there is a system limit. So all that stuff gets built into this. And then unfortunately or unfortunately, like there's a lot of detail, such as once the water moves in, some people are trapped in their homes, some people decide to stay. Those percentages are also based on data. And then in some cases, people are trapped in those, and there are fatalities because they're trapped in buildings that are collapsed due to flood water. So that sort of gives you a sense of the sophistication of these models. And the outputs are very sensitive. So we have a couple disclaimers. The reason we don't show, there's a lot of tables. You are privileged to be able to look at those tables and see the actual numbers. They're not publicly shareable at this time, nor do I think the Corps doesn't share those numbers to the greater public, because those numbers can be mismanaged and misinterpreted without a careful overview. But that information is built into the recommendations about various plans. This is a very dense graph. I wanted to flash it to you. This might be better over a coffee or other beverage to explain it. But the main takeaway from this graph represents tolerable risk guidelines and their representation of tolerable risk. And these dots, the triangles, represent overtopping scenarios, and the squares represent failure prior to overtopping. So the levee breaches prior to overtopping. And it's teased out by district. And the purpose of this graph is to show how risk changes from the baseline to the selected plan. And you can see in general, everything, in some cases it changes dramatically, like in the case here. I don't know how well folks can see this. This is maybe like a tease for you to get into the economics appendix, and then you can study this. This is very dense. But in general, if you look, the left-hand side of the graph is the probability of inundation. All these arrows are going down towards a lower probability of inundation, sometimes very dramatically. In Pen 1, the risk of inundation due to a failure prior to overtopping is astronomical. It goes basically to zero because we've addressed things like the railroad embankment. MCDD West, the same thing happens there because we're addressing the section of vulnerable levee near headquarters and the chance of a cross levee failure from Pen 2. So these are the kinds of things that went in and sort of reinforced which project elements work, which project elements don't work, which ones are worth, from a life safety standpoint, worth the money that we're spending on them, and are ideally selected because they're bringing life safety risk down. So some of them don't change as much. That's probably because, in some cases, it's because overtopping, we have a limit to which we can raise the levees, and eventually there are some scenarios where the levees will overtop. So they do change to a lesser extent. But again, our ability to raise levees is not limitless. It's extremely expensive, and at some point we just have to manage into risk, and that's why we evacuate people, because if we have that 1 in 2,000 storm event that comes along, it's just very hard to manage. So we can't build to that level of risk or that frequency of risk, but we can build to the typical risk, the 1,000-year to 100 to 1,000 year type
Hey,
storm.
Mark. Hey, Mark, there was a
Yes.
question in the chat to explain the 2 dashed lines. And then Claudio has a hand up, and then we probably need to move on to the last couple slides we have.
Okay. The 2 dashed lines are called the individual life risk line and the societal life risk line. Those are based on policy. They're based on statistics. They're based on there's a lot built into those. And again, I would encourage everyone who's interested in learning more to read the life loss appendix, because it really goes into better detail than I can. However, it does recognize that there are differences between what society finds acceptable in terms of life risk and individual life risk, and that's how those curves are patterned. I think I kind of want to leave it at that, and we can try to address that separately better, try to look at the report and provide a better synopsis than I can right now, if that's okay.
And then Claudio
As you
has a
can see,
hand.
the goal is to get, as many of these arrows, as many of these scenarios get below both of those lines, obviously, is the goal. And in some cases we fell short, but we did improve or reduce risk, I should say.
Kenzie gave her thumbs up. It was her question, so we can hear from Claudio.
Thank you.
So just to make sure that I'm reading this right, and in all these, we're talking about the probability of a particular level of life loss. So, and it seems like in all instances it's dropping below these lines, but it's on a log, it's on some kind of a log scale, right? So if you look at you're dropping the likelihood in Pen 1, they're dropping all the way down to this roughly the same level, but the actual life loss is the same Pen 1 as round 1, and MCDD, it's kind of tough to read just because it's a log scale, but I'd estimate somewhere like 750 or something like that. Is that kind of how we're reading this?
Yes, and if you look at the tables that actually show the probability distribution, you'll be able to pick some of those numbers off. But that actually is the approximate value for like that 90th percentile. And
so that's bringing it back to the benefit cost work that they did. The real drivers there for the value of the project is really going to be more as we move to the right on this graph, right? Like the folks that where life is more protected by the work that we're doing. Is that correct? That's going to weigh more heavily in the benefit cost.
Yeah, I mean the life loss doesn't actually, like I said before, we don't put a value on lives, and we don't, so those numbers don't go into the BCR per se. And I would say that BCR is kind of used as the initial screening tool for a lot of these projects, obviously, the practicality, but the core is managing the selection of projects more by these ulterior factors, and in the project it does describe other social effects. Life loss is very very highly regarded, so it's more highly regarded than it was in the past. And General Graham, when he came through from the Corps, he made it very clear that we don't just look at NED anymore. So it might be a very good, so we have the benefit of having a very good BCR, so we kind of get our foot in the door. Then we have these other additional effects. Some drainage districts might be generally protecting very few lives. They might be covering agricultural areas, but so this is very compelling. But I hope does that help, Jamie?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Chair Humble, I just want to do a time check. We're a little over our time on the agenda, and we've got just a few more slides. Can we continue with our few slides?
Are there any objections? Continue.
Okay, thank you. So Mark's going to just give us a brief update on where we are with the revenue options.
Yeah, I think this slide we updated since the last time we spoke. We kind of updated and added the partner contributions. And we kind of gave a little bit of a where are we now on these various items. So we do have a meeting slated to learn more about the state levy grant fund from Business Oregon. We are working partner contributions. We'll be discussing that here in the next slide. Jamie will kind of go over our efforts with the city of Portland. And then I think the rest of this information is fairly static, but these are our main options. We just wanted to capture these a little bit more accurate and have all the options in there on revenue options. And we're going to continue to do our research on those, but wanted to kind of give a quick update. And then this is, sorry, my little bells and whistles here.
Yeah, Evan just was like, hey, this doesn't show the updates.
Mark, you're going to need to push the arrow forward a couple times and then you'll get through this.
Thanks. So I think all this is stuff that we emphasized last time, that some of these revenue options are options for some districts and not others. This sort of captures that. And I would say that we just sort of generally as staff, we anticipate future recommendations, you know, being strongest to start from the left moving right. Like we hope to cover down on a lot of the costs with the state levy grant fund. Obviously that's competitively based, so it's not a given, but we feel like we're competitive for that. And then, you know, moving right. So private loans are probably, for instance, our least option, but, you know, perhaps it might be used to cover down on the balance of funds required for PAD in the end. So this is what we're going to speak to in a minute. And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie because I've talked at you long enough, but I look forward to your future questions about these appendices and modeling.
We just pack in so much in these updates. So this 18-month timeline should look familiar to you. It'll look a little bit different every time we bring it, just because we make adjustments. This is a living document. We've added the key federal project milestones across the bottom, so we can kind of keep track of, you know, where we are. And I guess one of the things I just really wanted to focus in on and have you highlight is when we're looking at this fall of 2022. So everything we're doing up to that point is to lead to decision making on your behalf in the late summer, fall of 2022. And so, you know, there's lots of information. There are some incremental sort of, you know, green lights that we're looking for from all of you. But really the big decisions are coming at you in about a year. And so that's, you just want to make sure that you're mindful of that. So looking at where we are today up in summer of 2021 and fall of 2021, you know, we're continuing to bring forward the funding options. At our next meeting, we'll be talking with you about advocacy. You'll see that advocacy 1. And then we're just introducing the topic of the City of Portland MOU as an example of partner collaboration, and we'll dive into that a little bit deeper at your next meeting. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, Mark. So partner collaboration, one of the things you've asked us about in terms of funding options is what are we doing to work with partners to explore partner contributions. And the City of Portland partnership is one example of that. Mark probably has a little bit more updated information because I think you all just met yesterday, is that right? On this as well. And so, but this slide just gives you an idea of, you know, our needs on the district side is all of us. And what the city is looking for, and the MOU gives us a vehicle for us to work together to start to actually negotiate and identify how we're going to address these different issues and what the opportunities are. So Mark, is there anything you want to add to update from your meeting yesterday?
No, we met Tuesday. I spoke with our project manager from the city, and we met with legal. So we have a draft MOU that is nearing readiness for sharing to both the city and with you all. And I'm eager. I think I just will be looking for approval in October. And I just want to stress the devil is not in the details of this document. The devil will be in IGA that results from the negotiation process. And so what we basically will be asking permission for approval for is just the ability to move forward and continue this work that we've already been engaged in. This sort of just formalizes the effort, the cooperative effort between us and the city on this.
Mark, may I just jump in really quickly? Hi, folks. This is Evan Mitchell, Public Affairs Manager for the districts. And I just wanted to add that, you know, you asked us to talk to you about partner collaboration, but the city of Portland really was the one that initiated this with us and has really stepped up in many, many ways to support our efforts to modernize the system. And this is one awesome example of how they're thinking proactively to support us, continue to support the 4 districts. We think this MOU will probably only be with the 3 districts that are in the city of Portland. So that we'll be bringing you resolutions and stuff to approve next month. But we certainly will be seeking other opportunities, maybe not quite as robust, maybe possibly. So if you do work for a public agency that, you know, is talking internally, about PMLS or other modernization efforts, it would be great to connect and see if we can advance those conversations together. So thanks. Sorry to add a couple extra minutes there.
Thanks, Evan.
And I just also want to stress that the MOU is not strictly speaking about partner funding partnerships. We're also looking just to find better ways to collaborate on the existing projects, so that when we go to construction, everyone's needs are met, and disruptions, for instance, construction disruptions are minimal, and we're all on the same sheet of music going into negotiating a design agreement with the Corps in the spring. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's it. Is there one more slide?
Thank you, Mark. I note that during your presentation, 2 of the supervisors for Pen 2 have been able to join us. So I call Pen 2 to order now. This is Val Humble present. Leslie, would you speak up?
This is Leslie Sawyer present.
Karen? Karen Myers, I believe I saw you on the phone.
Are you thinking Kathy Kellen?
Yeah, well, go ahead, Kathy.
Okay. This is Kathy Kellen.
I also saw an iPhone for Karen Myers. Are you still there, Karen, or not? Okay. Anyway, we do have quorum with 3. So Pen 2 is in order. And we can go on to the next item on the agenda. Item F, resolution to ensure public safety for the obstruction of assets. Hong, do you have the floor on that?
I do. Thank you. Thank you, board members, for having me today. I was asked to look at ways to help address some conditions that are occurring in our systems that's impacting O&M. And I couldn't ask for a better segue than Mark's presentation to you on the PMLS modeling of damages, and particularly the life loss and life safety issues, because this resolution that's being presented to you today goes to the heart of that. I don't have a fancy PowerPoint presentation, so you're just going to have to look at each of us in boxes, but you did receive in your board materials a memo from me, as well as a proposed resolution for each of your district on this issue. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the City of Portland and the Port for allowing me to at least consult with their attorneys in sort of framing, helping me frame the issues for us. I think given that we're kind of short on time, and I want Jim to be able to talk to you more specific about the issues, I'm going to try to keep my legal presentation brief. And there are really only 3 points that I want to convey to you. But if you have any specific questions beyond that after my 3 points, I'm happy to entertain questions. The first is where the authorities that we're presenting to you to manage obstructions and encroachments are existing authorities. They rely on both state and federal authorities in 547, 554, and the Federal Flood Control Act and its related regulations. So there are existing authorities to manage these encroachment and obstruction conditions in the statute, as well as existing authorities to also seek criminal and civil enforcement. So there's nothing in this resolution today that requires us to do anything more. I prepared pretty thoroughly for you in the resolution, your authority. So I believe that it's a fairly strong legal basis to do this work. The authorities also, or the resolution also seeks to address particular conditions that fall within the decision-making process. So what is obstructions? What is, this will control or manage all conditions that we deem are obstructions or encroachment. And that decision-making process will, as the statute provides, filter through an evaluation and determination by your flood control director, engineer, or the secretary based on information from the engineer. And we can, through it, as the statute provides, determine if certain conditions that are affecting on our facilities, around our facilities, are impacting in some ways significantly the O&M of our work. The district has a clear obligation under state and federal requirements to conduct operation and maintenance. And if we can't do that because of some condition, whether it causes clogging or being able to do routine work, we have authority to declare that as an obstruction. We have relied on this authority in actually a number of development review projects where developers want to put a building up or something up that somehow impairs or interfere with the drainage way. We've been successful in managing and controlling some of the development that way. We've never had to pursue criminal or civil enforcement with anyone, but certainly we have the authority to do that. And one of the conditions that this will cover, so again, this resolution today covers broadly all conditions that we deem to fall within this category. But one of the conditions that we'll cover, and Jim will talk more about this, are the homeless camp conditions that are pervasive sort of throughout our district that are have present some significant O&M challenges for us. The last thing I want to point to you is what we proposed here is very reasonable and, in my opinion, defensible because we're putting public safety first, whether it's public safety for the individuals of the campers or public safety of our staff trying to get the work done. And we are a special district with, really a very special purpose, and that makes it easy for us to manage these type of conditions. We're not the city and we're not the county, and so we don't have as broad, we're not a broad general service provider entity, we are a special district. And so I believe that what we've articulated in the resolution here will be, is reasonable in light of all the accommodations that are being asked, that the law has asked us to make for this community. So with that, I'm open to questions, or we can send it over to Jim to sort of dive into for you specifically based on the existing strong authorities that we have to manage these conditions, to sort of talk about the implementation steps of it. Any particular questions on the legal issues? Or do you want to wait till Jim's presentation?
I don't see any hands.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Hung, for all your hard work on this. And just a shout out to our operations team who really is struggling to confront the conditions that they have to work in every day. I think I've told you all this before, but there's a significant amount of trauma in those folks, seeing folks living in those conditions. We've had staff have had guns pulled on them. We had a long rifle pointed at a boat doing inspections from the Columbia River. So it's really hard. And I want to just offer my respect and appreciation to the team for going out every day and trying to work in those conditions. And I also want to express my just sympathy for folks who are forced to live outside. I think as a community, we all have an opportunity and obligation to try and do better. And I see a lot of people trying, and I think we're going to make progress. Shifting to some good news, we were successful working collaboratively with the City of Portland and multiple bureaus. And just beginning yesterday, we've removed almost 100 cubic yards of debris surrounding Pump Station 4. So that started yesterday and will continue for several more days. Again, it is a collaborative project because our property is surrounded by city property. And we were successful in working with their impact reduction program, the Bureau of Parks and Recreation, Bureau of Environmental Services, Portland Bureau of Transportation, and others to get support for some limited action there to regain access to our facility. I know that I and our crew would really prefer to see that entire area cleaned up, but I want to let you know that the city is aware and they have limited resources and a ton of priorities, and they continue to be working in a helpful way with us to try and address what is a really challenging situation for all the public agencies involved. So here's some things that we are working on, and they're not in any particular order. And then Corky, I think we can probably get into some of the cost issues because our costs are increasing for this activity. I want to assure you that in almost every case, we are deploying our resources on our properties or on areas where we have the easements Hong talked about. We're not going beyond our immediate operational needs to spend money on this issue. We really are trying to operate our system and keep people safe from flooding, and that is our focus. So we are going to be adding security patrols to key facilities. We have a vendor who comes by our headquarters 3 times a night. And that has really reduced the amount of camping going on back at the end of Rod Drive. And so we're gonna, now that we've got some situations opened up, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second, like Pump Station 4, we're gonna send patrols down there to try and prevent a repopulation of those areas. We've also really directed everyone involved in all of this to report everything to law enforcement, regardless of the jurisdiction that we're in. We did have some folks who said nothing's going to happen, but I said, no, reporting is really key. So folks have been directed that regardless of what the response is going to be, we need to continue to share information with law enforcement about the circumstances we're working on. And I will say North Precinct for Portland Police Bureau is really struggling right now with staffing and a lot of other issues. And so they have limited resources and have made decisions about deploying those resources that result in very little law enforcement support for this topic because they're busy working on gun violence and other things that are much more immediate threats. So we're also going to be installing additional security cameras at a variety of facilities, most notably Pump Station 4. There's both a security opportunity there and an operational benefit. We can actually look at the forebay to the pump station on camera and determine whether we need to send someone out there. And that's connected with some other work we're doing operationally to try and minimize the number of visits to sites that our staff does not feel safe. So we may be drawing down certain areas during the daytime so we have more capacity during the night. So Bill and his team are starting to look at options for us to alter our operations to improve safety for our staff. As you saw in the contracts report, we are increasing our contract with Cascadia Behavioral Health. We use Cascadia to conduct outreach and notification of for campers so that they have due notice that we need to change things in certain conditions in certain locations. So for example, at Pump Station 4, we had Cascadia go out with flyers that we produced that explained the challenge for us operating flood safety equipment and that we needed to create access, and we provided a map that showed how we were going to do it, where we were going to do it, and we told them when we were going to do it. We offered help in moving vehicles. We offer supplies and other things to folks. So that's what Cascadia is doing. We have several other locations. The next focus is going to be some cross levees where we have significant camping activity and blockages to some key inspection and other operational needs that we have. I want to stress that Portland Parks and BES and Water are enthusiastic about our plans to create more structures that will prevent repopulation of these sites. So we're getting support from those bureaus and collaboration from those bureaus to prevent access once we can get cleanups accomplished. We are increasing our towing work because again, on our properties or on our easements with the city and PBOT having policies and limited capacity that really restrict their ability to help us, we're going to need to do that work ourselves. So I'm just letting you know we will be spending more money on that. I mentioned the eco blocks and other barriers that we're installing. We have essentially purchased every eco block available in Greater Portland. We're spending about $25,000 over the last week and next week to purchase all of those. They're really heavy. The only ones left are out in Hillsborough. We can carry 15 on our truck, and we need a couple of hundred. So you can just see the logistical challenge in moving them 15 at a time from Hillsborough. But we are working with our partner agencies and we're getting some interest in helping us with that. But we are going to install those eco blocks to try and maintain security and access to our facilities. And it will cost us some money. We're working with Metro. We have provided them at their request with a list of sites that are sites of frequent illegal dumping. And we've also indicated which of those sites are near or adjacent or within homeless camps and which sites have challenging access, whether there's a locked gate that we put in place, most of those have been damaged, or it's only by foot. So we've provided that, and I want to thank Randy for his help with and his team for the help in pulling that together. And Astor, our new public affairs person, has also been really helpful in getting that done. So Metro received that earlier this week, and we'll be following up with them to determine what role they can play in helping us hit those sites more frequently for cleanup. We're also increasing our contract with Rapid Response BioClean. These are the folks that are deployed right now at Pump Station 4. The reason we use a specialized vendor is there is human waste, there's some toxic waste, there's some other biohazards, needles, things like that. So it does require some training and specialized equipment to conduct these cleanups. I was very pleased that yesterday they were actually using some heavy equipment. They often do it all by hand, but the scale of the problem there required heavy equipment. We have some draft works in place now, but we are going to be implementing a pretty assertive signage program that delineates our properties and our easements and reminds people that these are critical flood safety infrastructure facilities and that camping and other occupations and blockages, as you'll see, are not allowed. And hopefully just even that signage will help us. We're going to be triaging the signage. Some of the signage will be very complicated and will require permits from the Corps or PBOT or others. So we're going to start right away with signs that we can install without extra regulatory work. And we're going to be working through the list of priority sites, even those that require permits. What else do we got? Gresham has offered to have a conversation about security. So we'll be following up with them to see if we can get some help. We are working closely with the Port and Metro and Portland and Multnomah County. I've been reaching out to some of the urban board members from Multnomah County. And I believe that we have a lot of interest. And I think the challenge is, despite the interest and a fair amount of willingness to do stuff, capacity is limited to make a difference. And the last thing, just to sort of punctuate the state of our ops team, they requested that we purchase them ballistic vests for their safety, so we're going to do that. So they'll all be going out, probably they'll be their choice, but I know most of them are going to choose to wear a ballistic vest as they conduct their responsibilities throughout the day. So the reason this ordinance is important is I want to stress to you that I'm not in any mood to go enforce civil or criminal penalties against one of our partners or a private landowner. That's not going to be very effective. There are going to be very limited cases where we have really recalcitrant landowners who aren't helping us. But really what this does for me is, and even in the development of it, it allowed me to really demonstrate to the city of Portland and some of our other partners that this is very serious and that there are significant safety risks, and that if we don't see some help, we may have to pursue something a little more forceful. And again, we have no desire to do that because our agency partners are in the same boat. and they're all struggling with this. So the most recent thing, and then I'm going to stop talking about this and answer your questions, is I was talking with Annalise actually, and I know that Metro is thinking about how best it could provide some support in convening the broader set of agencies to think about this challenge, both from the garbage side, but potentially the homeless side. So I want to thank Metro for considering how they can contribute to that. So at the end of the day, we're going to regain access to Pump Station 4, but we still have some really serious issues with our ops team not feeling safe going down there. So we're going to continue to work with them, try and provide them additional tools. We're likely going to be increasing our security. We'll have Cascadia Behavioral Health on site when they're operating there for de-escalation and other support. We'll probably be installing extra fencing at Pump Station 4 with some visual barriers, which we believe will help and help the team. And again, the cameras will hopefully help us capture some of the activity down there and help with our storytelling with our partners about why the site may need to be a higher priority. So with that, again, we're going to use this tool very, very judiciously, no pun intended, but it is helpful for me to be able to remind our partners that we have easements and a critical function, and we need their support to be able to fulfill that function. And I'm sorry to have to talk to you about this topic.
I appreciate the fact that you are making the effort. That's it's an important need, and I'm glad to see you're actually as active on it as you are. I see we have a question from Kenzie Berry. Are there potential synergies between this near-term signage effort and the identified need to enhance evacuation path signage?
I think there is. There's slightly different routes and slightly different locations and slightly different messages, but I think that's worthy of note. And we're definitely thinking about that safety issue and thinking about how we can best implement it sooner rather than later, because it's such a great educational opportunity for folks to understand they're living in a managed floodplain, and ideally to build awareness and support for the fundraising we collectively need to do to implement the PMLS and our other plans. So thank you for that idea, Kenzie.
Great, thanks.
Nancy, you have your hand up.
Thanks. So I just want to confirm something I heard Hong say, which is these resolutions, I think one of the purposes of these resolutions is to pull all our different authorities together to make it really clear that we do have this authority, because there's no change in that. It just, it's in a nice little package for us to show to other people.
Yes, that it does do that. The one, I suppose if there is one leap that it does is publicly declare in here that certain conditions of encampment present safety risk. So we're making that connection, and we're making this connection for you in the resolution with support from Bill and his O&M team, telling us that they can't do the O&M work. And if you can't go in and clear the debris that we normally can clear as we go into fall, then those debris are going to cause literally a clog and obstruction. So the limited or the lack of access for us to do the O&M gives rise to an obstruction or clogging condition in which we are pursuing measures to control.
Jeff, I see your hands up. Jeff Noodleman, your hand up. You're
There you go. Sorry. Thanks, Val. Great job, everyone, on an extremely difficult topic, of course. Jim, I think you mentioned the word, I wrote it down. So if these policies or implementations don't work or produce positive results, I think you use the word, we'll need to get more forceful. What does that mean?
I would see us actually sort of sending a letter saying you've got legal risk because you're not addressing a situation that's preventing us from operating our facility. We need to meet about that, and worst cases, we're going to take care of it and send you a bill. But again, I think that will be a very rare thing that we do because it's an authority I don't really want to use, particularly with our public agency partners. So, and we're not seeing a need for that. But I think there may be some private landowners or absentee landowners and others. So I just wanted to have that there and get your authorization to do it. I would probably bring any action like that to the board before I would take it. In fact, I can commit to you that I would.
Because, yeah, so I appreciate that, the clarification, because reading the A and the B, working in partnership, which quite frankly and candidly sounds a little fluffy. But as from a landowner perspective, and it's very difficult, and none of us can make policy that's a one size fits all, of course. And you've done a great job of laying everything out here. But speaking as a landowner, and then with knowledge of others, of course, I can't imagine too many folks are willingly accepting and creating some of these risks. And from our standpoint, I can tell you, nothing is done yet, of course, but the Expo Center, which sits across from one of our large properties, is considering, I emphasize considering, RV parking, et cetera. So what's happening, and then the spillover, et cetera, onto these private, and I'm not speaking selfishly, onto other private and of course public landowners. Again, if I can't get help from, as you described, our partnerships with local cities, Malone County, appropriate service providers, I don't know what I'm supposed to do when I get a letter from you and saying, hey, fix it. So I'm just looking for a practical solution rather than just words, and I hate to complain about things. I mean, I'm downtown. I mean, many of you are, I walk by this every day and I rarely complain because I don't have an answer. And, I've taught my kids as well, unless you can come up with a solution, don't sit there and complain about it. So I don't have a solution, but I just want to share that kind of realistic overlay to an excellent job, and I applaud Han and others of laying out a policy that I think is needed, but there is also kind of a practical, realistic overlay we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I really respect that. I guess what I would say to you is we have very specific narrow locations where our operational capacities can be limited by this activity. And we're going to focus on those. And most of the time we're successful in reaching out to people. But let's just take our cross levies for an example. There's no way we're going to get PBOT or Parks or anybody to move those vehicles because they just don't have the policy or the capacity. So that's not a criticism of those agencies, but we need to do it then, right? And because we need that access or things are going to break. And so what I've directed our team is, go notice those people, get your tow truck vendor, and if somebody is violent with you, you leave and we call the police and we see what happens and we document it so that when there is a flood, we have a record, right? And if there is a landowner who we've tried to reach for assistance and we can't get them or they don't reply, then I think that's when we would say, hey, look, we actually have legal authority. We'll help you. And maybe we're not going to be successful because we need law enforcement. But again, we need to turn this up a little bit. And I guarantee you we'll be thoughtful about it. And this is not a tool I want to use, but if I need it, I'd like to have access to it. And again, I would come to the board before we take any specific legal action against anyone.
It actually, Jeff, the statute requires us to come to the board should we feel like we need to pursue a claim against a property owner or anyone for these conditions.
Even better.
Thank you. Corky, you have your hand up.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I have to say first that your comment about the ballistic vest is appalling. It really struck home. I've been in places where some people wore ballistic vests and some of us said, no, I don't think it's really necessary. Essentially having the same questions your staff is having, but those were war zones. Those are places with UN troops walking around. I mean, this is, it's appalling that we're in that same situation. I don't quite understand, but that's just my commentary. The question, I think, and you answered it a little bit with Jeff's question about saying we may end up taking the step of telling another agency, another government agency, that there are some legal risks incurred and we may end up taking a step of sending them a bill. not that I want to do that, but it sounds like you've already started the thought process, and that was essentially my question, is there's a certain level of cost, historical costs, reasonable costs, things that are our responsibility. Can we distinguish the costs that, the costs we incur because other government agencies are not doing the job that we would normally anticipate they do? That additional cost beyond our normal historical and reasonable cost for this sort of situation. Can we make that distinguishment? And then we get into other questions. Is it even appropriate for us to do their job for them? But it sounds like what you're saying is, in many cases, it is. We need to go ahead and tow vehicles, for example, and go ahead and do that. So I guess, but that's basically my question is, have you already given thought, and is there a way to kind of distinguish between the costs that we should be covering and the costs we should not be covering, in anticipation that perhaps in the future, we may need to go to those other agencies and say, this is the additional cost you caused us to incur. Here's your bill. Pay us back for that.
It's an excellent thought. And I would probably need to lean on my finance team and ops team to figure out whether we could do that. I want to just stress that what we are focused on currently is really our properties where we have key infrastructure. And given the state of everyone else, I'm not sure I can attribute a particular camper to a particular agency. I'm not sure that's a fruitful path to walk down, because
no, not the camper, but the activity that caused us to incur costs.
I think it's something we ought to consider, and we ought to be trying to be cautious and careful about how we track our costs. I would say, and Bill, you can correct me, I think you're on, we're going to probably spend 30,000 or so at Pump Station 4, maybe a little more, to get this access back. Is that a fair number? But again, it's our property, it's our pump station, it's our obligation to be able to operate it. And we've actually got support from the city of Portland, maybe for less than we would have liked to see happen, but they covered the costs for some of that as well. So again, it's
and that's where I'm going with this. If we have that sort of partnership, great, fantastic, wonderful. Let's encourage that. But let's make sure we're clear on what we think we should be normally covering and what other agencies should be covering. And if they're not doing that job, then we add a little pressure to it. Hopefully we don't need that.
Yeah, and I think what most of us as public agencies are confronting, honestly, is when people refuse to leave, you need a law enforcement presence. And so Metro, the port, Gresham, everybody has resources that they want to contribute to supporting this. There's not anybody shirking the cost here. What we have is a lack of overall capacity to address the problem at one big time. So there's some prioritization that's been done by the impact reduction program at the city that put Pump Station 4 pretty high on the list after they dealt with some school areas and some other things. So again, they're working through the worst sites and they're cooperative about that, but no amount of money is going to instantly change their capacity to deal with the situation. And I think if I think about the Port of Portland, they're in a similar boat. They really are anxious to clean up some of the levees that are in their ownership. And they've got plans in place to do that in contracts with Cascadian, Rapid Response, and so on. But when people refuse to move, we need that law enforcement presence to force it. And that's right now the Achilles heel. You all read about it in the paper every day. So
what I'm hearing from you is perhaps my concern is not fully justified, that it's a little bit over concern, and I would say that that's probably due to the good work you're doing. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your concern is super valid. I'm just not sure it's timely.
Yeah.
But I think tracking it is really valuable and worthwhile. But what I'm seeing is, when we offer resources, it's not the resources that's the problem. It's the overall human capacity to use the resources.
Yeah.
And honestly, back to Expo, there's no place for these folks to go, right? And so until we can address the safe rest spots, or we can make progress on other shelters, and I know we're ahead of schedule on the City of Portland and the regional housing bond and construction of housing, despite construction costs, and they're under budget on those things. So again, solving this problem is going to take some time. And if you think back to the beginnings of it, it's disinvestment at the federal and state level in mental health, in housing, in education, in healthcare that has caused this problem. This, and the city and the county and the port and MCDD are stuck at the bottom of that funnel of a series of societal failures that's created this problem. And all of that was exacerbated by the pandemic. So I don't mean to shirk responsibility, but I see a lot of locals stepping up to try and address what is essentially a national failure.
This is really,
sorry to spout at you, but it's I think it's important to keep it into context.
and this is a very important subject. We are running rather long. Are there any people who are going to need to leave and thus impair our ability to pass these resolutions if we continue to discuss this?
Thank you for the robust discussion.
James, you had your hand up. Did you want to say anything?
Sure, just quickly, I want to reiterate to everyone the obvious, which is what Jim just mentioned about this is a national crisis. And I believe everyone understands also that there is no place for a lot of these people to go. They've achieved, rightfully so, legal standing to not be continually moved on from place to place. That's also important. What I'm seeing in this is the need for the agency to strategically go in and maintain facilities, ditches, pump stations, things of that nature. And so I'm very supportive. I also want to say I'm supportive of what you're doing, which is continuing to look ahead at increased costs for strategically maintaining assets and services, increased costs and support for staff to do that work safely, the people out doing this work. And so thank you for trying to keep them safe and for bringing this to our attention so that we can be prepared to continue services knowing that they're going to have an increased cost and risk for staff. So thank you, and thank you to the staff who are doing this.
Thank you. Does this bring us to the place where where we're ready to consider resolutions regarding this?
I'm okay with it if you are, and I'm happy to answer additional questions.
MCDD, do you have anyone there who wishes to make a motion?
I'd be perfectly happy to. This is Corky. I'll move to approve resolution R 2021-09-02, ensuring public safety by managing the occupation and obstruction of the district system.
This is Nikki Schultz. I'll second.
Thank you. I'll just call the roll. Kenzie?
Agreed.
Corky?
Aye.
Nikki?
Aye.
And myself, I also vote aye. Motion carried.
Thank you. For PED 2, do I have a supervisor who will make the motion?
This is Leslie. I move to approve the resolution R 2021-09-02, ensuring public safety by managing the occupation and obstruction of the district systems.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Is that Kathy?
Yes.
Any discussion? Let's take roll call vote. Leslie, how do you vote?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Val Humble votes aye. I see Karen Meyer's iPhone is still listed. Are you there, Karen? Regardless, PEN 2 passes 3 votes to no nays. Resolution is passed for PEN 2. PEN 1?
Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'll move, this is Jeff. I move to approve resolution R 2021-09-02, ensuring public safety by managing the occupation and obstruction of the district system.
Thank you, Jeff. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Annalisa. Thank you, Claudia.
As being present, so I was a little bit late to the meeting. I don't think I got called in the roll.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll do roll call vote. Claudio?
Aye.
PJ? I think maybe PJ dropped off. Annalisa?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
This is James. I vote aye. The motion passes.
And SDIC is not in session. They have not acquired a quorum. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I guess we're ready to move on to item G on the agenda.
I think on behalf of SDIC, I want to also let you know that Troutdale and the city there have offered any kind of assistance they can provide on a repeated basis. So thank you for that, Tanny, and to the city manager there.
You bet. And this is great work, you guys. Nice job. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian, are you on board here for item G?
I am happy to. Jim, I wanted to just double check with you my question earlier. Would you like me to proceed or ask the board for what we should do next based on time and quorums?
So there's a question here that I'd like the board to consider whether you'd like to, we can postpone this item till all the boards are available to hear the presentation. And if the board would prefer to continue and we can present this separately to SDIC, it's a little more efficient for us to do it once. At the same time, it'd be great to make progress in the other districts. Also a potential opportunity to make up some time. So Brian very thoughtfully reached out to me during the conversation to ask what your preference might be. Thank you for that, Brian. Very thoughtful.
How many folks would like to skip this item on the agenda?
I don't know about Pen 1 quorum wise, but I've got to drop off. So go ahead without me if we're still good.
Are there any implications, Brian, for our FEMA work?
No, it can definitely wait another month. I'll just also update the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District meeting to a future date as well. So they're coming in October, but we can bump it all out a month. It doesn't bother me. We'll keep going with what we have in the meantime.
Well, are there any objections to skipping it? Let's do that then.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate your patience and your flexibility, and thanks for your consideration of that, board.
No problem. Have a good day.
Yeah.
No, you didn't want to skip the revenue development presentation. Did I understand that correctly?
No, let's do that one. I think all of you are interested in that. It kind of underlies all the stuff that keeps coming up. So let's do it.
Let's do it. I guess Nick's back on.
Yes, sir. So very quickly, as soon as the meeting is over, we will send you many materials that we handed out at this revenue committee. I actually meant to send it ahead of time. I apologize. There's never enough hours in a day. But I'm going to give a quick recap of what we did at the committee, probably 2 minutes. And then I will send you all the materials for you to digest. I know some of you are on the committee and some of you are on the urban board. So many of you have seen this. But in general, earlier this month, we held the kickoff meeting with Echo Northwest district staff and our project and the subcommittee for the revenue development project. It was great to have it. I really enjoyed watching Echo Northwest at work. The focus of the meeting was to establish a common understanding of the purposes and outcomes of the revenue project, to confirm the role of the subcommittee, to identify key opportunities for input from the subcommittee, and perhaps most importantly, we reviewed and refined the work plan that was prepared by Echo Northwest for this project. Their work plan is quite detailed. It's their preliminary work plan involves about 12 pages. It's 2 phases and involves 15 specific steps. So we reviewed that at some length. Their project manager, Sarah Rich, walked us through the entire work plan and invited comment, such as touch points when we might give input. The committee also decided to meet for a while monthly. So 2 things are going on right now. Echo Northwest is refining their work plan to take into account some of the suggestions they were given by the committee. And I am in the process, I'll get out today, polling committee members to try to pick a monthly date for our meetings. There's some limits on that. So you will get shortly the agenda, the work plan that Echo Northwest developed, the minutes from the meeting, and I'm actually sending a copy of the PowerPoint slides that Echo Northwest prepared and presented at the meeting. So all of that you will get shortly. Are there any questions on that? Okay, then I'll save you 7 minutes.
Thank you. I guess that brings us to you, Jim, for any new business.
Let me think, what do I think mostly it's around the homeless work. I have been working with the urban board to come up with a vision and a workflow, and it gets at a very high level now that's starting to pencil out a calendar for revenue development. Most importantly for, I think, your all's interest, also working to develop the programmatic nature and cost projections for the new mandates that the urban board has been assigned by the legislature. And our goal right now, it's sort of an aspirational goal and requires still a lot of technical work to determine feasibility, but our goal would be to assemble 3 external committees to help frame out the new mandates and ideally make some recommendations sometime late spring, early summer about programs that might suffice to meet the legislature's mandates and the revenues required, both operating and capital, to do so. We're pretty excited about that, and hopefully we can overcome a few barriers that we're starting to identify on the technical level as to what that might take. We're also working to examine what's required to get a bond referred to cover some of the capital costs that you all have struggled with. And so we're beginning our best thinking about what we need to do to be ready to go to voters potentially as soon as May of 23, potentially November of 23. The reason for that really is that revenue is critical to the federal match, and the more money that we can get from the broader new district, I think the easier it is for the existing landowners in the floodplain, and we all benefit in urban Multnomah County from this system. So we really want to take advantage of that new authority. The reality of the structure within the organization is becoming clearer to me as I'm moving into my 4th month on the job. And so I'm beginning an effort to talk with the leadership team about some ideas that are occurring to me about some staffing investments. We have some budget authority that we've not implemented yet because I kind of walked in the door at the last minute. So we have some FTE and a few other things that that we can deploy. So we're beginning an effort to really pin down what we want to do with those resources that you so generously provided to us. We have our equity consultant is back on board, and I have a meeting next week, and we're going to dig into a workflow around developing the equity action plan that is required by MCDD's policies. And we hope to be bringing all of you a companion policy around equity. The MCDD one's really focused on staff and our internal operations. So we're working as a staff to bring you something relevant to reiterate our commitment to that work. And then we have a lot of work going on with prepping for the short session of the legislature, again, trying to attain revenue for the urban district and take the burden off the landowners to get this thing started up. Staff, is there anything that I'm forgetting that I should be telling our awesome board members? Billy, homelessness and fundraising, those are the focus, keeping people safe when they're out doing their jobs.
I appreciate to hear that you're trying to scrounge up money wherever you can.
That's right. It's the main job.
Is there anything else? If not, I understand that the JCA planned meeting is not going to happen because of notice or something, some such.
Yeah, unfortunately, we did not adequately notice that meeting, and again, that's on me. My regrets to the JCA members.
So Pen 2 then is adjourned. Pen 1.
Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Val. Thanks to all the board members and staff. Have a good day. Pen 1 is adjourned.
MCDD.
MCDD is adjourned. Thanks for your attention, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate all of you and your time. I know this is volunteer work for all of you, so we're really grateful for your help.
And thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you all.